Today we are going to be watching a video featuring Dave Rubin and Frank Turek. If you don't know who these people are, Dave Rubin is a right-wing charlatan and grifter who seems to have no real opinions of his own and only goes where the money tells him. Frank Turek, by comparison, is a fairly sincere Christian apologist, a fundamentalist Christian apologist. And I would consider neither one of these men to be what I would call an intellectual heavyweight, but today they're going to be talking about a prominent new atheist who has realized his main error. Normally when these types of people talk about prominent atheists having main errors, they've realized those main errors involve something like religion is useful for keeping those people under control. And of course, when they talk about those people, they're talking about black people, feminists, gay people, trans people, and so on. Anyone they view as infringing upon their little worlds. So we're going to watch this video and see what they have to say. Don't expect anything amazing from either one of these people. And let's just check it out and see where it goes.
Let's start with the title of this book. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist.
I find this a very interesting title because people like this, like Frank Turek, normally consider faith to be a very good thing. They think the more faithful you are, the better of a person you are. And yet, when they get the chance, they like to say atheists have more faith than religious people. If that were the case, wouldn't that be a good thing? But yet, it's kind of revealing because they sort of say, well, no, that's not a good thing, actually. But let's continue.
I didn't think of it. My co-author
So
did.
I should say you are technically the co-author of this book. Tell me a little bit about your
Well, Dr. Norman Geisler, when he died in 2019, Dave, they added up the number of books either wrote, co-wrote, or updated. It was 129.
Wow.
The man had written more books, not only than most people have read, than most people have seen, because who goes to the library anymore, right?
Right.
Okay, I think this is also fairly revealing about these people and their mentality because over the years 2021 and 2022 alone, I read about 130 books. I used to practically live in the library, and I wasn't the only regular there. I know a lot of people who read a lot of books. I know plenty of other people who also read somewhere in the realm of 60 books per year. This is not an enormous number, but I guess to people that only specialize in the one book, it is a truly momentous number. Although I must give credit to anyone who can be involved in helping make that many books in some way or another. That's really good. I can appreciate that. But I've never heard of this person, and if he works with Frank Turek, or if Frank Turek likes him, I can only assume negative things.
This guy was brilliant. And at one point, he and I were traveling the country doing a talk we called the 12 Points That Show Christianity's True. And he
I am going to have to do a video on that very soon. I can see that now.
went through the fine-tuning argument that the universe is fine-tuned so incomprehensibly. And after he got done with this amazing presentation, he finally said, in light of this, I just don't have enough faith to be an atheist. And I went, that needs to be the title of the book.
So it really was a throwaway line.
Yeah, he just...
It's a throwaway thought, too, because these fine-tuning arguments only sound more and more ridiculous every year. I mean, we know that in our galaxy alone, there are probably somewhere in the realm of 200, 300 billion stars. Let's assume each one of those stars has about 5 planets, which seems like a reasonable number. That would mean there are somewhere in the realm of 1 trillion planets or so in our galaxy. We have discovered somewhere around 5,500 of those planets in our galaxy. And we've discovered that there are a whole lot of planets in the habitable zones of their stars. Not only that, there are a whole lot of planets that probably have liquid water. Even in this solar system, any number of bodies have water on them or in them. And so I think these fine-tuning arguments just become more and more ridiculous as we discover more and more about the universe. I understand where they're coming from. I just think it's a silly thought when the conditions for life as we know it are that common. YouTube's algorithms work on watch time, so if you like this video and want to see more videos like it, or if you want to help this video get further, please just watch a little bit more of it than you were planning to. It will help a whole lot. Thank you. We'll get back to the video now.
I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. So he said, well, let's write the book. So we wrote the book based on the seminar we were doing. We sent it to the publisher and they said, we don't like the title. I said, you don't like the title? What do you think the title should be? And they said, The Truth About Truth. I said, sorry, that's a deal breaker. We're going to another publisher. They said, okay, we'll stick with the title, and thanks.
I actually agree with them here. I think I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist is actually a pretty great title if you're doing a book about atheists being wrong, because faith itself is obviously incredibly questionable, and the truth about truth, that's just not catchy at all.
Thankfully, they did.
And the book came out in 2004. Tell me a little bit about how you two linked up your journeys to get to the book, and then we'll dive into, obviously, the specifics of why you don't have enough faith to be an atheist.
I was in the Navy, which stands for Never Again Volunteer Yourself, for 8 years.
Well, at least he's capable of learning some lessons.
And but I came to faith by reading books by a man by the name of Josh McDowell. I was brought up in New Jersey, so I was Catholic because, as you know, in Jersey it's the law. You're either Catholic or Jewish, right?
Yeah.
I went to Catholic high school, but I never knew who Jesus was. And
I find this very hard to believe, personally. I must point out here, never believe anything this man says or the other man, Dave Rubin. Never believe anything these people say, because they lie for a living in both cases.
When I was in the Navy, I met the son of a Methodist minister, and I had so many questions for me. He said, Frank, you just need to get Josh McDowell books. Evidence demands a verdict more than a carpenter. So I read those books, and I began to realize that Christianity is indeed true.
You should read more books by better authors, Mr. Turek.
I got out of the Navy, I happened to meet Norman Geisler, and he said, I'm starting a seminary in Charlotte. Why don't you come down and check it out? So we did, and 6 months later, we moved the whole family there.
Did you consider yourself a believer before that, or you were just sort of nominally Catholic or just secular Northeast?
I became a believer in the Navy by reading these books and then starting to go to church. And then when I met Geisler, who I didn't...
But he was already Catholic, so whether he took his Catholicism very seriously or not, he was already a believer. Let's be clear about that. These people like to exaggerate how faithless they were before finding fundamentalism, because fundamentalism is very extreme, obviously, so it makes sense they'd want to just like make themselves seem like, oh, well, I wasn't very faithful at all before I converted. And there is some truth to that. I'd say most Catholics are not anywhere near as extreme as evangelical fundamentalist Protestants. But that doesn't mean Catholics aren't faithful in their own way.
Know at the time, but to use a dated reference, he was the Michael Jordan of apologetics, what we call evidence for the faith at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I've never heard of him, and I have read a lot of books on apologetics, so there's something fishy about that. Maybe I should check out his books. Tell me what you think in the comments.
And when I met him and looked him up, I said, if I want to get into this field, this is the guy, right? You know, it's like in philosophy, your friend Jordan Peterson, if he was still at the University of Toronto, and he was still teaching and you wanted to learn, that's the guy, right?
No, that's not the guy. Jordan Peterson is insane. Like, let's be honest. He is just a madman at this point. Have you seen Jordan Peterson recently? He never really had it all together. He always rants against postmodernism, but the way he uses words is very postmodernist, as many people have pointed out. When you ask whether Christianity is true, he's like, well, what do you mean by true? What do you mean by Christianity? What do you mean by is? What do you mean by these words? Well, here's the thing. Those words have meanings, okay? And just trying to like muddy the waters by saying, well, what do these words mean? That is pretty much the basis of postmodernism, questioning the question. Jordan Peterson does it wrong. And by it, I mean practically everything he does.
He was the Jordan Peterson of Christian apologetics.
So the reason that I wanted to have you on now, and my producer Phoenix has been mentioning you for quite some time, is that there seems to be something interesting happening with the atheist movement, if we can call it a movement. I mean,
and here we get to the meat. Finally, to the meat. They're going to be talking about this main error. Boy, I can't wait. Can you?
In essence, it has basically fallen apart. You know, from Sam Harris sort of disappearing off Twitter and having, you know, a lot of political problems. That whole Four Horsemen thing sort of disappeared. The new atheist movement, I don't know if you've seen that the president of the, I think, Atheists of America, David Silverman, has basically come out and said that the atheist movement was a failure. This is just in the last 2 or 3 weeks or so. I've seen other well-known atheists like Skeptic, my friend Michael Shermer, talk about how there is a purpose and a need for religion. Okay,
so I want to point out a few things here before we move on. Michael Shermer, was accused of sexual assault, and that spun him off into some like really crazy right-wing anti-woke sort of stuff. He was a libertarian before that, which is its own brand of crazy. David Silverman has always been a very sketchy person, but I'm pretty sure what spun him off in that direction too was he also had accusations of sexual misconduct and or assault. So right off the bat, he's mentioning two people who already have these huge ethical, moral problems, who are suddenly saying, well, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was wrong. Look at the world we've created where I have to take accountability for my actions in a different way. It's not the Christians making me do it now, it's my own people. That's so much worse. But no, it isn't. Accountability is not a bad thing. And I think there is another thing to be said here, because the new atheist movement has indeed fallen apart and scattered to the four winds. It was necessary for its time. I was a part of the new atheist thing. But it fell apart because there were all these conflicts between, like, obviously the major new atheists and those sorts of skeptic types were often straight white men, very privileged people from very privileged positions. And the main problem a lot of them seem to have with religion is that religion was seen as infringing upon them and their lives in some way. And then, as religion's influence started to decline, because America and the UK have secularized considerably since the New Atheism movement started about 20 years ago, other people started getting seats at the table. Women, trans people, black people started getting seats at the table, started being able to actually speak up and say, racism is wrong, transphobia is wrong, treating women poorly is wrong. And a lot of those people had a problem with that, because now it's their own people infringing upon their rights to be just as terrible as they want to be. And so the new atheism movement fell apart. And I think it's a good thing that it did. But let's also make another note here. Even though new atheism fell apart, the atheist movement, the secular movement, the skeptic movement, is regaining a lot of strength that it had lost. And this time, it's progressives leading the charge. It's not those sort of Dawkins, Harris sorts of very extreme, privileged white dudes leading the charge this time. This time, it's left-wing progressives who are advocating for a better society and a better world, not just free from religion, but free from bias and bigotry and more accepting of other people who never had a seat at the table. This is very important stuff. This is the crux of the argument they're going to be making here. So with all of that in mind, let's finally continue.
We'll fill that up with something else. And of course, Jordan Peterson talking about how people end up believing whether they believe it or not. So there's something interesting culturally happening right now, which is sort of why I wanted to bring you on. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that, just sort of what's happening right now.
I think that the new atheist movement, Dave, was a reaction to 9/11.
I would actually agree with that. It was a reaction to 9/11, but not just 9/11 and like Islamist extremist, but also I think a lot of people like this underrate their own role in that, because you got to remember who was in office when 9/11 happened in America and in the UK too. I mean, in the UK, it was Labour Party, so the left-wing party, but it was Tony Blair who was like super Christian and made a big deal out of it a lot of the time. In America, it was George W. Bush, who was a big fundamentalist evangelical guy, all about Christianity, and he was very like religiously extreme and intense. And I think because of that, like, you know, 1-2 punch of 9/11, you know, Islamic extremism, and then this holy war sort of thing that George W. Bush went on in the Middle East, that is what spurred the new atheist movement to say, hey, religion is currently causing a whole lot of problems. Now we have a set of new problems being caused by religion, but I assume we'll get to that very shortly.
Yeah, because at the time, the new atheists at the time were Christopher Hitchens. I had a couple of opportunities to debate him in the 2000s, late 2000s. Also Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris.
Even Dawkins,
Daniel
I don't know
Dennett.
if you've seen it in the last couple
Well,
of
I
weeks.
heard
has said,
you had a podcast not long.
Yes, Dawkins is in fact very anti-trans, as a lot of people in the UK are. I have my own idea for why this is the case. I think the UK is a lot less diverse than America. And so I guess for the UK, this sort of second wave white middle class feminism was all the UK had for a very long time. It was the feminism of the UK. In America, though, second wave feminism didn't have like that widespread cultural currency. It did make inroads all over the place, but it kind of collapsed under the weight of the evangelical counterreaction. The UK didn't have that, so second wave feminism continued there. But as a result of second wave feminism collapsing in America, you had the rise of third wave intersectional feminism, which was led by not middle-class whites, but all of the people who didn't feel like they had a seat at the table, as I mentioned before. And so America had this very strong intersectional movement that emerged in the 90s and gained strength and became super strong by the 2010s. And oh God, it's like Frank Turek is looking into my soul right now. That's kind of creepy. But anyway, we had this intersectional feminist movement, so trans rights became important in America to a lot of people in a way that in the UK they were just like an anathema. So that's one thing the US did right that the UK did terribly wrong. The UK did not so much consider anything outside of the white middle-class feminist bubble. In America, it's very different. Intersectional feminism had a very different character and quality to it. So as a result, in the UK, you've got just this whole society that's like poisoned by those second-wave feminist sorts of anti-trans stuff that still exists to this day. Whereas in America, secular people, feminist people, are more likely to be intersectional, and thus like trans people. So it's the evangelicals who are super anti-trans. Very different situations.
Long ago, where you were talking about how Dawkins has basically said that, well, religion does have some benefits to society.
It keeps those people under control, the transgenders who are demanding I call them pronouns that make them feel safer and more comfortable, which I just cannot bear.
Yeah.
And I think he's realizing, too, that in Britain, in particular, a tepid secularism is not going to resist a radical Islam.
I think that is actually a good point. Now, I am not anti-Islamic in the same way that Sam Harris was, but I do think that religion as a whole is very bad, and I think that of the religions today, Islam is the most extreme. And you can see this like appearing even in the United States, where in certain areas, like let's say there's this one place near Detroit called Hamtramck, which is like it used to be a big like Polish Catholic sort of city, and now it's sort of become like a very like Muslim city. And their mayor actually won the Democratic primary by saying he'd ban pride flags from government property. So there's been big fights over that there. And I mean, things like that are happening now, which is a problem you see in Canada. There's like a big part of the anti-LGBT movement in Canada is Muslims getting together with Christians to oppose any curricula referring to gayness or transness, that sort of thing. So yes, Islam is a problem, and it's pretty clear that this, as he called it, tepid secularism is not going to be enough to rebuff that. But I don't think Christianity is the solution here. Christianity is part of the problem. If it's the case that Muslims are in the West a problem for being so socially conservative, then it's also as big of a problem that so are Christians. Christianity is not a bulwark against fundamentalism. Christianity at this point is more fundamentalist than ever because all the reasonable, rational people have left.
But Christianity could be, just from a pragmatic point of view, from his point of view, can maybe blunt radical Islam. So he's...
No, it can't. You don't fight off one form of radicalism by endorsing another. You just can't. Now, granted, in the UK, they don't have as much of this fundamentalist, extremist weirdness as the US has, but I would think that would actually be an argument against using Christianity as a bulwark against Islam in countries like the UK. If UK Christianity is itself as tepid as the secularism, it's not going to do very good at fighting that off. In America, well, I mean, they're collaborating. Canada, too. So, no, this whole argument is just nonsense. And I'd say it to Dawkins, too. Dawkins, if you're out there, I know he's not out there, but I like to imagine. Dawkins, if you're out there, you're full of it, too, buddy.
Realizing there's some pragmatic uses to religion. But I think originally the new atheism came out of 9/11. These fundamentalists, you know the old saying that science will teach you how to fly a plane, but religion will teach you how to fly a plane into a building.
Correct.
You know, that kind of thing. And so they were really adamant against any religion, and they would put them all together. Islam, Christianity, all these religions are just basically looked at with disdain at the time. And I think
For good reason, and they should still be.
people are starting to realize that's not really the way the world works. That's not really true. These
Yes, the very privileged white atheists are coming to that point of view because they're realizing, actually, if we don't want to have to call trans people by the correct pronouns or correct names, well, the Christians are on our side here, so we may as well just pair up with them. This is obviously terrible, by the way.
religions are different, and they're different for good reasons.
Yeah, so it's interesting because what you're describing as the Christian sort of argument as the pushback against radical Islam, I think what we have here is the pushback against wokeism.
Yes.
That people, and this is what David Silverman from the American Atheist was saying, he did not realize that wokeism was going to become, I think he called it a cult, not a religion. And I think that's sort of what brings us to this moment in America.
Just proving my point more and more. These people don't want accountability. They don't want to have to be accountable to anybody but themselves. So ironically, I think that's one really ironic thing that I have to point out here. In fairness to the Christians, a lot of Christians did say that a lot of atheists just want to be accountable to nobody. And in that regard, regarding people like Silverman and Shermer and Dawkins and Harris and whoever else, they were correct, which is sad, but you know, I guess it's good to know these things, and the worst people you know can sometimes have good points, and they definitely made it with like this specific group of people that they're now heralding as being just sort of lions of rationality, these masters of the universe as it regards coming to agree with them on everything. See, it's the fact that the Christians were right about these people that makes these people useful allies to the Christians now, because they're starting to see the Christians as being on their side against the oppressors, trans people and such. It's a whole bunch of silliness. You know, these people are chronically unable to get outside of their own heads and see things for what they are. And it would be really funny if it weren't so sad, but that's the world we live in, I guess. What are you going to do?
Yes, and Silverman was the president of the American Atheists. In fact, I had a debate with him probably 7 or 8 years ago, but then he left that role. I don't even know what he's doing now. I mean,
he left that role because he was accused of sexual abuse, if I understand correctly. Let me look that up, actually, to make sure I'm not wrong. Okay, everyone, here's what I've found, courtesy of Wikipedia. David Silverman, misconduct controversy. On April 13th, 2018, Silverman was terminated as president of American Atheists over complaints of financial and sexual misconduct. Silverman had been placed on paid leave on April 10th, pending an investigation into a complaint received on April 7th. The day after his termination, BuzzFeed News published an article detailing allegations of unwanted sexual contact by 2 women, subsequently denied by Silverman. So that's what Silverman did and why he didn't leave but was terminated from American Atheists. Not exactly your sterling example of a good guy just realizing how bad things got from what he created. But wait, there's more. Michael Shermer, allegations of sexual harassment. In 2018, Kimberly Winston reported in the Washington Post that Shermer had, quote-unquote, denied allegations of sexual harassment and assault from several women. Several women. Undark magazine reported that the allegations against Shermer began to emerge in 2013 and 2014. Fancy that. My point, as it were, should be entirely obvious now. These are not the people you want to be defending your cause. These are not the people you want to be flocking to your cause. They have a vested interest in going against quote-unquote wokeism because they are bad people doing bad things to other people and don't want to be held accountable and want to go against what has made them accountable, which is quote-unquote wokeism. Not Christianity.
the whole movement maybe has pretty much evaporated, really.
Yeah.
Hitchens, of course, passed away. Dawkins is starting to realize there's utility to religion from a pragmatic point of view. And I know it's going to sound odd, Dave, but I have a lot of respect for Richard Dawkins because he has more.
Because he hates trans people. They both hate trans people. That's where the respect comes from. If Dawkins wasn't speaking out against how bad trans people are all the time, this guy would hate him.
More courage than many American pastors.
What are you talking about? Who is leading the charge against trans people in America? It's not American atheists, it's American pastors, influencing American lawmakers. That's the people doing it. That's the people doing the damage. Frank Turek is so obtuse, it's ridiculous.
I mean, Richard Dawkins has spoke against wokeism. Richard Dawkins has said, I'm sorry, there's only two genders, it's science, right?
Yeah.
Richard Dawkins has talked about the problems with radical Islam. Most pastors are hiding under their desks on these issues.
No, they are not, Frank, and you know it. This guy is so disingenuous at times. Like, as far as apologetics goes, the guy is sincere to a fault. But with this stuff, this political stuff right here, completely disingenuous.
They're not coming out and talking about this. So to his credit, Richard Dawkins has said some things that I wish American pastors would say.
So what's going on there? Let's dive into that a little bit, because it's not just pastors. I mean, this is happening throughout Jewish synagogues. It's happening through almost every denomination of Christianity, where the rabbis, the pastors, they're choosing wokeism. They're choosing equity over religious teachings.
Right.
Oh my God. I think I'm going to have an aneurysm if I keep watching this. So I think this is where we're going to call it. For today, I do want to watch more of this because I am a glutton for punishment. But, you know, for today, I think we can call it there because I've made the main points I wanted to make. So I think that's that for that. For today, we will revisit this video because this is some maddening stuff, isn't it?